So with that being said, I'll set the scene. So for everyone joining us, my name is Michael Llewellyn. I'm the CEO of Tarski Technologies, which is a product development firm focusing on blockchain. And I mean, I've been doing blockchain and showing up to blockchain meetups here in Dallas since about 2012. So to see it come this far and to kind of see the turnout we're getting as well as the speakers that we have is really remarkable to see, and really excited to see what this panel has, especially because I've worked with almost all of these platforms that we're talking to now. I know a lot of pros and cons, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how they impact startups. I mean, we've seen blockchain adoption from JP Morgan working with Consensus and Microsoft working with Starbucks on tracking, all the way down to a lot of fintech startups here, such as Zabo and other blockchain startups such as Adara Hashgraph that are all starting to really grow here in Dallas, as well as working with some of the bigger players in the space. So with that being said, let's talk to our speakers here. We've got Hudson Jameson, Paige Krieger, Karen James Lubin, as well as Mance Harmon, who will be joining us shortly. So with that being said, I'll give you all some time to introduce yourselves, give us some background, starting with you, Hudson.
Everybody, I'm Hudson Jameson. I have been in the blockchain community space, whatever you want to call it, since about 2011. I worked for a few years at USAA, which is a bank and insurance company, leading their blockchain program until 2016, when I left to join the Ethereum Foundation to do some of their communications, event management, DevOps work, and then kind of shifted from that into protocol development, liaison work, and community work with Ethereum. So I do like stuff with the protocol developer meetings and some of the specifications that Ethereum is built around. I'm also on the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance's mainnet working group, and am on the technical steering committee for the Baseline Protocol, which is an enterprise Ethereum platform offering that's open source. Yeah, I think that's about it for me. I've lived in Dallas for about 10 years and really enjoy it around here. Really excited to be on this panel today with everybody participating.
All right, thank you. On to you, Paige.
Sure. So hey, everyone. My name is Paige Krieger, and I'm a go-to-market product manager at IBM. I've been focusing on the IBM blockchain platform for the past couple years, and just recently expanded into our telco and edge solutions as well. Been in the blockchain space, like I said, since 2017, which was when I graduated from TCU. Go Frogs, if there's any alum on. And whenever people ask me why I got into blockchain, because my background is in advertising, marketing, minor in business. So it was an interesting journey to IBM. And then once I got here, I ended up in the blockchain space. And I joke and say that it's because I have trust issues. But in all seriousness, it's really because I feel like as soon as I learned about blockchain and the fact that it can instill trust in the foundation of business processes, and it brings transparency to antiquated processes that are in desperate need of it and that greatly benefit on an efficiency side of things. If blockchain were to be implemented, that's what really, I guess, inspired me, as well as its ability to impact so many industries and even have kind of that blockchain for good lens that we've really gotten to dive into, even through COVID and everything that we're going through in the world today. And over the past 3 years, I've loved watching the blockchain landscape evolve, and I'm excited to talk with everyone today, hear your guys' perspectives, and thanks to Michael and Dallas Startup Week for having me.
Thank you. All right, let's hear from you, Kieran.
Hi, everyone. Kieran James Lubin here. I have been in the blockchain space for quite a while. Starting in 2014, I actually worked on the Ethereum project on some of the kind of theory of the protocol side, also helping to coordinate the Ethereum's foundation's interface with academia through a group called the Cryptocurrency Research Group. Collaborated a lot with Vitalik in the early days, etc. Saw in late 2014, early 2015 that there was actually a real commercial opportunity for blockchain, and that the big technical questions, while many of them were still open, enough were behind us that there was the opportunity for the company in the space. And the opportunity we saw was focused on the more B2B kind of enterprise market. So we founded Block Apps early 2015, worked with Consensus, who likely everyone knows. We were sort of incubated by Consensus. And in the first year in 2015, ended up going on to build the product and partner with Microsoft to create the blockchain as a service category, which was really one of the first instances in which you saw enterprise adoption of blockchain as a technology and less focus on the currency financial aspects of it, at least at the outset. So it's been a good long journey there, but so I have the unique experience of running a somewhat traditional SaaS company in the blockchain space. And so happy to talk about that more throughout the panel ahead. I actually, in the very early days, wrote software for the company. I do not get to do any of that anymore. Do things like this, work with our customers, work with our investors, all that sort of thing. Been to Dallas a few times, not a resident though, so a special guest, I suppose.
And I can sympathize with the not coding enough as I used to.
Indeed.
And so it looks like Mance is still trying to resolve some technical difficulties, but just so we can go forward, I'll do a quick introduction for him. I think many of the people in the audience will probably be familiar with Mance if they attended our session last year, because he gave an introduction on Hedera Hashgraph. But Mance is the CEO of Hedera Hashgraph, which is a local Dallas startup here based in Richardson. They have been working on a distributed ledger protocol that is going for kind of an enterprise use case. Oh, Ronnie Thomas. Is that you, Mance? Okay. 1 second. Okay, now it's gone. All right. But okay, so where was I? I was talking about Mance, and so Mance Harmon I've met him multiple times. He's a very nice guy, very sharp, has a good background in both cybersecurity and building software systems for the Air Force, which he then brings to Hedera Hashgraph. So looking forward to hearing more about him. It looks like we can see him in the chat, so if there's anything you want to mention, Mance, then you can certainly shoot a text, and we'll work with that for now. As long as you're working with tech support to resolve the issue, hopefully we'll get you online soon. And I'll leave you to work with Hamza to coordinate that. But so with that being said, what I'll do is, okay, he's on support screen. So then with that being said, we'll definitely want to hear more from Mance. So I'll keep aware of the time to make sure he has some time to comment. But we'll go ahead and move forward with another kind of general question to everyone, because the reason this panel I think is so unique is that we've got a lot of different perspectives. We've got people coming from various backgrounds, or rather organizations and platforms, coming at blockchain from different angles. So what I'd like to hear from each of you is what makes your platform unique in this blockchain space, and why would the audience, as either a startup or a business owner or someone who's like a developer that wants to get in the space, why would they look at your platform and see that as where they want to build their new product or work on opportunities? So starting again with you, Hudson.
Sure. So as far as Ethereum goes, I think that what sets us apart and why people should try to at least check us out as a platform, we have a strong open source ethos. So a lot of the technology that Ethereum is built off of is open source. Ethereum, the protocol itself, is entirely open source, as are the specifications. And we have a lot of community and developer mindshare that we've grabbed from the blockchain ecosystem because of that, I believe. There's a real welcoming vibe to the Ethereum community. It's also really weird, not really hostile. So in short, yeah, just it's very welcoming, and I think that people should give it a shot if they want something that's both and challenging and adventurous, with something that they can also just, find someone online on Twitter or on Reddit and say, hey, how did you do this? Or, hey, what's this project about? And get a response pretty quickly. It's a very open community.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Paige?
So I feel like I'll keep it short, because this is basically what I do all day, is talk about the blockchain platform at IBM. Essentially, it's industry leading in the fact that we've worked with most of the major industries where blockchain projects have been implemented, and it's our commercial distribution of Hyperledger Fabric. So at its core, it's a set of advanced tooling that helps you leverage Hyperledger Fabric, which is also an open source technology. And we give you the ability to deploy anywhere. You basically can leverage the console, the dev tools, and build, operate, grow your network We'll be with you each step of the way, providing obviously support. And a lot of IBMers are some of Hyperledger Fabric's biggest contributors. So the expertise is there, as well as just the ability to increase your time to market and get business value as quickly as possible. So if you're a startup and you're new to blockchain, you can really leverage the platform to rapidly create smart contracts, have easier network management, and the multi-cloud flexibility. So I think that kind of speaks for itself, but it all just depends, and I'll say this at the top of the session, on your use case, because there really are use cases that are more suited for a public permissionless network versus private permissioned, or even public permission. So we can get into that later, but I think it's important to analyze what you're trying to get out of the network and who your players are, and then kind of go from there.
All right. Yeah. And we will get into it. I'm looking forward to it. All right. Over to you, Kieran.
Thanks, Michael. So BlockApps has created a platform called Strato. We are based largely on the Ethereum protocol, but realized sort of fairly early on that there were certain needs that enterprises had to consume Ethereum that were beyond the core protocol. Some of them non-technical, some of them just things like having a commercial company that has support. So there's a little bit of that Red Hat model that we do, in that it was not within the mandate of at least the initial maintainers of most of the Ethereum code bases to work in that capacity with commercial companies. But we've also discovered over the years that we needed to sort of quickly create solutions to certain specific problems, like the way privacy works. So everyone wants a shared ledger, wants reconciling ledgers across businesses, but no one wants to expose any more data than on a need-to-know basis, whereas public blockchain ledgers typically have essentially full visibility to the data that's put on the ledger. So we created some very innovative solutions for that problem. Another big benefit of our platform that extends beyond the core Ethereum protocol is the ease of integration. So we've developed REST API on top of Ethereum, and also connectors into existing ERP systems, single sign-on, just your heavy enterprise IT systems that no one is going to get rid of anytime soon, that nevertheless must still be authoritative systems of record as you add blockchain technology is a big strength of ours. So on the startup side, also, we just not about the product. We have a partner program for independent software vendors where you can get some limited, less than list price or free access to our software for a certain period of time and some support out of us. We also do some help with go-to-market, so helping startups with good solutions either work to provide something for our existing customers or jointly going to market, going after new customers is something we tend to do, a fair amount of.
All right, perfect. And perfect timing, Mance. You came just in time. Welcome.
Thank you. So I haven't heard a word that's been said, unfortunately.
No worries. So we were all talking about kind of like what is your short pitch for the platform that you're representing here. So we heard from Hudson, Paige, and Kieran on kind of what makes themselves unique and why a startup or a business might want to use them. So with that being said, let's hand it over to you and hear what you think about Hedera.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah. So Hedera has been designed from the beginning to be an enterprise-grade global public network that is managed by enterprises, governed by enterprises. So it uses the Hashgraph algorithm, which is an alternative to blockchain. It has fantastic performance. Today on the main net in a throttled state, we're doing 10,000. We can do 10,000 TPS. We have capacity for 10,000 TPS. It's got cryptocurrency, file storage, distributed file storage, smart contracts, and something we call Hedera Consensus Service, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later. And as important as the tech is the governance model, we have a council today of 15 global blue chip organizations that are Hedera. They own Hedera. They're members, all members of an LLC that is Hedera. And it includes Google and IBM and Boeing and Deutsche Telekom and LG and Nomura and Tata Communications and FIS WorldPay. There's a bunch. It's that caliber of council member that we're talking about. They govern and manage the entire thing. And so it's enterprise grade, governed and managed by enterprises for enterprise applications.
All right, awesome. So with that being said, let's get into some targeted questions I have prepared. And I think since we've ended with you, Mance, I can go ahead and start with a question because you were talking a little bit about how this is a blockchain panel, but we've kind of had an interesting discussion in the community of, DLT and blockchain being intermixed, and you've described yourself as not necessarily a blockchain solution, but something different with Hashgraph. So
Sure.
Could you explain more of that difference between what like a DLT like Hashgraph is versus what a normal blockchain would be?
Yeah. Well, people use the term blockchain as sort of a catch-all for the entire space. But blockchain as a term really refers to a data structure, a chain of blocks of transaction, each block holding a lot of transactions chained together, and each node in the network having a local copy of this data structure, the chain of blocks, the blockchain. It also refers to a consensus algorithm for how the community can come to agreement on which block needs to go on top of that chain. So they all stay in sync and have the same, quote, blockchain. But that's just one approach to solving the problem, the fundamental problem of how you have more generically a multi-master, multi-party database solution where all the nodes in the network have a local copy of a quote database in sort of the most generic sense. And they have a consensus algorithm that allows them to figure out how to update their local copy of the database such that all the masters stay in sync. And Hashgraph is a consensus algorithm that, like blockchain, it refers to a data structure. It's a graph held together by hashes, but it also refers to a consensus algorithm that enables the nodes that have a local copy of the hash graph to stay in sync. And so there are a lot of different approaches to solving the same category of problems as I've just described. And blockchain was just the first one that sort of picked up steam and made it through the hype curve. And now the industry loosely refers to this category as blockchain. A lot of people will also make a distinction between public and private. I don't think that's a good distinction, saying private networks are DLTs, public networks are blockchains. That's not true. It has everything to do with the consensus algorithm and the data structure that's used under the hood.
Gotcha. All right. And so with that being said, let me go over to you, Hudson, and talk more about what Ethereum is up to, because Ethereum kind of is continuing the blockchain structure that Bitcoin initially started with, adding a lot on, making a lot of improvements, and now it's going with 2.0. But I think one of the things that Hashgraph is trying to address with a new approach is scalability and the ability to, kind of address things that the initial structure might not have figured out. So could you explain more about what Ethereum is trying to address 2.0 and kind of how the initial, will the blockchain structure remain there in 2.0, or is there going to be some kind of a significant difference? I guess what are your thoughts on how blockchain fits into the future in terms of the data structure?
Sure. So with Ethereum 1.0, it was largely based on some of the stuff that Bitcoin was developed on, such as proof of work consensus algorithms, or a proof of work consensus algorithm that we have called ETHash. And what we're doing with 2.0 is we're trying to address both the consensus algorithm part and scalability. For the consensus algorithm part, we're changing from proof of work to proof of stake, where instead of having miners competing with each other and expanding all this energy by solving math problems, they are doing virtual mining in a way where they're randomized and taking turns validating blocks. And when they do that, they get rewarded for it. And you don't have to expound energy, so it's not wasteful or bad on the environment or anything like that, which is one of the main driving factors behind that. But it's also more secure. Without getting too much into the weeds, basically there's a lot of security trade-offs that you have with proof of work versus proof of stake. But overall, for what Ethereum is designed to do, proof of stake works better for it and is more secure than proof of work for its type of system. Additionally, with the scalability, right now we're getting really popular, so we have a lot of bad problems with fees right now. It's not even really that that's not really fun to have to spend multiple dollars to transfer Ether on an Ethereum blockchain right now. So we're having growing pains, and what we're doing for that are two things. One is in Ethereum 2.0, we're going to have sharding in the next few years, hopefully a little less than that, where you have, instead of every computer having a full copy of the blockchain, you have different shards or pieces of the blockchain that are spread up across 64 different shards. And it's basically just a split blockchain. And you have different parts of the consensus algorithm that map out which shard you should be using at the time and which one you should be syncing with. In the meantime, though, and this is something that's happening in the next 3 months to a year, we're having layer 2 solutions such as ZK Sync, the OMG network, Optimistic Virtual Machine, and Optimistic Rollups that are a ton of different technologies that are all helping take a lot of the transactions off chain, so that you can, for things that are less vital to be on chain at all times, you can have like maybe a decentralized exchange passing tokens back and forth over and over again between different users for very, very, very low amounts of transaction fees. And finally, goes back to on-chain when you need to verify or finalize the different trading schemes that you have set up. So all that to say, layer 2 is going to make the transaction fee and scalability problems a lot better. But 2.0 is the ultimate goal for this base layer scalability that we're working towards.
Gotcha. So would it be fair to say that Ethereum's approach to scalability is to improve the base protocol? Part of it will be improving the protocol, but a lot of it will be creating more of a hierarchy of how blockchain transactions are processed, rather than trying to kind of put it all in one place, to distribute the load a little bit more.
Absolutely. It's about using different layers of the stack. Layer 2 being right on top of the protocol layer. You don't want to do everything at the protocol layer necessarily, because that'll get bloated over time, that'll get complicated over time, and that might not be what you need as far as security trade-offs go.
Gotcha. All right. Well, so with that being said, I think there was actually a good comment from Kieran in his pitch on what he was trying to basically figure out as far as what were things that enterprises needed that Ethereum at that time was not addressing. So I'd like to hear more from you in terms of what does the Strato platform do a bit differently than Ethereum mainnet, and in what scenario would an Ethereum builder potentially choose Strato over Ethereum? Not necessarily because they don't, because maybe Ethereum can't scale. Let's assume Ethereum does scale, we do 2.0, but what are other scenarios where someone would say, I still would prefer Strato because of other needs that are out there?
Yeah, great question. So there's a real mix of needs that we've seen. One of them certainly is around scalability, which I think led to this question. And I think it's a different problem in a fully public context than it is in a somewhat permissioned context. So if you were talking about automating a supply chain between a certain set of potentially a large number, but a set of permission parties, you're a little less worried about really exact, double spend protection to the same degree. You don't have necessarily a unit that you can't create or destroy. You're tracking a shipment or something like that. And the data, it's more about the full provenance of the data than it is about one global conserved quantity. And to that end, our sort of permissioning privacy solutions actually help with scalability. So we have the ability to take, let's say, a smart contract representing some sort of shipment and selectively put the data on sort of the main blockchain, which is not a full public chain, but that's what everyone would see in the blockchain network, and alternately put parts of the data with permissioned access on a sort of per counterparty level or within smaller groups. This is along the lines of sort of, they call them the side chain solutions that Hudson was describing. So we had to do this very early on, and just because of enterprise privacy requirements, in essence. Prices can't be visible to competitors, that sort of thing. What the upshot is that you get a really large improvement in terms of the ability to put less data in a common space and push more of the data to the edge. And that allows essentially the sharding that Hudson was describing to happen, whereby you can split a workload more evenly across a certain number of parties and get a linear speed up as you put more computers to work on the same problem, so to speak. So it's a solution we had to develop out of necessity, actually more for privacy, but then for scalability reasons. But it turned out to be kind of extremely useful for scalability. So this is a kind of a good example of where we worked for a particular kind of customer requirement, and it ended up being really broadly applicable. And so it's a case, yes, where we have something pre-baked. It's something you might be able to, we're based on the Ethereum protocol. It's a thing that you could, to a degree, retrofit on top of it, but you would have like a real development effort if you were trying to do so.
Gotcha. All right, that's very helpful. And so with that being said, with what IBM blockchain is trying to do, there's kind of a similar problem set that Kieran's describing. He's doing it with Ethereum, but IBM is also doing it with Hyperledger Fabric. But the same thing, there's not only scalability, but privacy, making sure that parties on a blockchain network, or rather certain parties, can't publicly see data for the many reasons that people don't want to provide their direct database access. So for what you've seen at IBM Blockchain Page, what kind of use cases have had the most impact? And do you think there's a lot of, I guess, there's been a lot of enterprise use cases like IBM Food Trust, but what do you think startups could also be using IBM Blockchain platform for? So let me back up. 2 questions there. One was how do you think that you're able to address the same problem sets as Ethereum? And then the second one would be, then what are the most applicable to startups?
Yeah, so first question around scalability. I mean, with working with Hyperledger Fabric and already achieving thousands of transactions per second, we haven't run into that as much, but that's because there isn't the mining component, and there's different ways of achieving consensus. And I think Mance and I can talk a little bit about the collaboration between IBM and Hedera Consensus Service that a little bit later to address some of the scalability. But for the purpose of speaking around use cases, I think a high level, theme that we've seen with startups is that most of the use cases that they're using the IBM blockchain platform for are around digitization of antiquated processes and then digitizing physical assets. So kind of seems like 2 really broad topics, and I can dive into some more specifics around that. The first being, which you mentioned, was IBM Food Trust. It's our most well-known industry solution that's out there. And for everyone that hasn't heard of it, it started with Walmart and now has grown to hundreds of other companies that are basically leveraging the blockchain to for provenance and recalls, and basically tracking food items from farm to fork. And then we're also using that same engine to span other industries, and that's called Blockchain Transparent Supply. I can send the links in the chat so you guys can kind of see the difference. But one way in which that applied kind of in the current environment that we're living in is through Rapid Supplier Connect, which is a solution that was bringing on non-traditional suppliers. So when COVID first came on the scene and there was a shortage of ventilators and PPE, we were able to leverage blockchain and that provenance engine and the supplier side of things to really give visibility to where these products were, who was producing them, and more rapidly establish relationships between vendors and non-traditional suppliers, and then the end customer. So really spans a lot of different things. I think some of the most common, whether you're looking at startups or enterprises, you have supply chain finance, trade finance. There's been a lot of work done around contingent labor, invoice reconciliation. So like I said, antiquated processes that are super manual. There's our TradeLens solution, which is digitizing all of the paper-based processes, e-bill of lading, that type of stuff. And then when you get into, there's newer spaces that are coming on the scene, or newer use cases, I should say, like e-voting or IP ownership, or even distributed energy, that I find all to be really interesting.
Awesome. Definitely sounds like exciting stuff. All right. So here I've got some compare questions now. And one is kind of a really interesting one that I think gets to like the heart of some of the different approaches we see. So I'll direct this to both you, Hudson, and Mance. So you're both public distributed platforms that are ultimately running nodes. And some of the ways that the platform itself are different, but I think one key difference between the two of your approaches are the way nodes are managed. One is a very open, kind of anyone can run a node access, versus one is very focused on certain members running it and being more involved maybe in a formal governing structure. So could you both kind of explain what the reasonings are for that approach and what some of the benefits you think are for it, starting with Mance?
Yeah, so I would say that there are two separate issues here. If a public, when we talk about an open network, in my mind, what that refers to is who has access to use the network. So anybody use the network. That's a public network. Excuse me, I said open, I meant public. If it's a public network, anybody can use the network. And then there's a separate question of who runs the nodes. And in our case, it is a permissioned network of nodes. It has everything to do with the question of how you bootstrap a new cryptocurrency from scratch when you're a proof of stake solution, not proof of work. This is a big difference between, of course, us and Ethereum. If you mint a bunch of coins, in our case, we minted 50 billion coins. The way the math works out is as long as fewer than a third of the voting weight of those coins is held by bad actors. So if a bad actor or a group of bad actors could buy up or collect a third or more of the coins, then they could do bad things to you. And they could stop consensus. Let me say it a different way. They could stop consensus. And so the question is, how do you bootstrap a cryptocurrency when the value is really low and there are not a lot of people out there that hold it? How do you prevent then a bunch of bad actors getting a third or more of your tokens? What you want is for the tokens ultimately to be broadly distributed around the globe and have a high enough value that it becomes practically impossible for a bad actor or even a state actor to buy up a third of the voting weight of the cryptocurrency, because the order of the transactions depends on the voting weight of the nodes running the network and how many coins they have. If they buy up a third of the cryptocurrency supply, then they can do bad things. So our approach is to start permissioned, meaning that we know who runs the nodes. There are no anonymous nodes. And over time, as the value of the token grows high and it becomes broadly distributed, then there'll come a point where we feel comfortable that it's safe to allow anonymous nodes on the network. And when that point comes, we will. And we'll be a public network that's also open in who is allowed to run the nodes. But it has everything to do with the fact that we started proof of stake and we had to bootstrap the cryptocurrency in a safe way to prevent bad actors from preventing consensus.
Gotcha. So basically, the role of governing council members now that are running nodes is not to be the only nodes running in the long term. That's just
absolutely.
A step.
So I mean, we have the initial shard. We will scale through sharding. The first shard is the governing council of nodes, and then in the future, as market needs dictate, we will create new shards, and those shards will probably next be permissioned nodes, not just council, but other companies and maybe individuals that we know, they're KYC. And you're still safe in that scenario. The security issue happens when you allow anonymous nodes, and ultimately we'll allow anonymous nodes and it will be a fully sharded anonymous solution.
Gotcha. All right. That's very helpful. Thank you. So I guess to you, Hudson, how does Ethereum approach this problem? And now that it's moving to 2.0, since Mance was talking about how they're protecting against bad actors in the proof of stake system, what are some steps that Ethereum is also taking to try and prevent that as they try to make their own migration to that system?
Sure. So yeah, as Mance Am I good now?
No, you're
okay,
good now.
Perfect. Must have been a hardware mute. As Mance kind of mentioned, it is difficult to bootstrap a currency, especially one that's proof of stake, and get the right distribution of coins out there. And Ethereum has the benefit that due to how our crowd sale went and how the coins have been distributed since the crowd sale back in 2015, it makes it a little easier for us to know that there isn't going to be necessarily one bad apparent actor with a majority coins that we were able to see right now. Obviously, that's always a possibility. Some of the very early founders or people who still may have a lot of coins that we don't know about could try to do harm. But the good news is we have crypto economic guarantees in our system that, like he mentioned, with the 1/3 being malicious, or basically having 1/3 of your network made up by a malicious actor would be negative. That would be negative in Ethereum too, but we have social coordination that we can do in the event that that would happen. That would be a catastrophic, or I would consider it a catastrophic event, because that would be someone holding so many coins that would just completely derail the value of the currency itself, etc. But getting back onto the main topic, I think the reason we're able to do this without having this permission set up at first is because a lot of that doesn't really align with the ethos of Ethereum. Ethereum and blockchain and cryptocurrency, a lot of it was started because they don't trust traditional corporations and they don't trust people and greed and all this stuff. So although Hedera Hashgraph says they're going to eventually allow for anonymous people to come on, you have to be skeptical until it happens. So that's why Ethereum wanted to start out as somewhere where anyone could join and there wouldn't be any kind of censorship or good or bad happen on the system, because anyone can participate. The technology doesn't know who's using it. It's just being used. So as far as the bootstrapping component goes, there is definitely a challenge, especially with new cryptocurrencies. But I feel like in our move to Ethereum 2.0, we're doing a lot to make sure that the coins are distributed as they have been for the last few years through crypto trading and people buying and selling and the crowd sale. And then on top of that, with the new sharded system we're having, that's going to help a lot with scalability, like I mentioned earlier. And then I think I might have missed one other part of your question, Michael. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you got it. Yeah, in terms of you addressed, how is node management going to occur? So that's interesting, because it's what I'm hearing is there's two approaches where there's kind of the blockchain platform kind of for the individual, and there's a blockchain platform kind of for the enterprise. And it looks like they're trying to kind of slowly come closer together, but they're starting from different ends. That's what I'm hearing from both of you. Which, don't let me put words in your mouth, but that's definitely my takeaway.
Yeah. And I was going to say that's one way to look at it for sure. And I think that at the end of the day, there's going to be different value cases when it comes to using a public chain versus a semi-permissioned or permission chain, like everyone's been saying.
Gotcha. So I want to go over to you, Kieran, and ask you a question more about because you alluded, I think, earlier on what how you're addressing a lot of enterprise problem sets, and you're using something based off of the public Ethereum chain. And you said you alluded to one thing. You said that it would be difficult to do that connection, or there would be a development task there. But do you see in the future that what Strato has now, or what you're doing now, would that ever, you think, tie into a public chain even more, to the point where you're potentially bridging that gap between enterprise and a public network like Ethereum or Hedera or anything else?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think there are some use cases for it, and it depends on, you can imagine certain data, you being worried about even 30 enterprises having access to it. It might be such sensitive data that you really want to prove that it didn't change, and so 30 big companies wouldn't be enough, and so you would want to put some hashed obfuscated record on a public chain and then reference it from a permission context, perhaps. And so, I've heard a fair number of people at least express verbal interest in this use case. I wouldn't say we've felt very strong commercial drivers towards it, but we might in time. Also, I think generally speaking, our customers prefer the fact that there is a compatibility with an open source and open protocol standard. Just gives them continuity, comfort, and all that sort of thing. Someone's mentioned baseline in the comments here. I would say in the short run, baseline has not affected our plans. We have an open dialogue with some of the baseline folks, and it's a project that actually is somewhat agnostic to whether it's deployed on a public chain or a permission chain. So there's an opportunity for us to integrate with it. and or we'll sort of see. We've served the use case sort of enterprise system integration via hashing to some other thing ourselves directly. We're also happy to adopt a commonly adopted standard. So we'll see sort of how it goes. I think it's early enough that we'll watch and see kind of if it catches on as a really broadly applied standard. But roughly everything we do is standards based if those standards exist. So I don't know if I mentioned we're also on the founding board of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance because we had the goal of standardizing at least some of the extensions that we've made.
Awesome. That's interesting. I've been hearing a lot more about Baseline Protocol like up until recently. So it's interesting. I think both Hudson and you have mentioned at this point in the event. So I'll have to look that up afterwards. I'm very curious now. But another thing that sounds like Baseline that I'd like to hear more from Paige on is this partnership between Hedera and IBM. Because I know IBM is now a council member with Hedera, and there's a lot of talk about integrating kind of the public network of Hedera with the Hedera Consensus Service with IBM's Hyperledger Fabric offering. Could you tell us more about that, and what would kind of be the benefits of combining a public and permissioned ledger approach?
Yeah, so I'm gonna lean on Mance to help me out here with this. I'll kind of start by just saying that essentially there was a question in the chat too around interoperability, and also mentioned earlier of private and how we don't necessarily like to use that word because you can always make something permissioned and then have a public facing aspect of it. So I think that's where this interoperability and collaboration comes in with Hedera Consensus Service, so that you get that public permission dynamic and you're leveraging the consensus mechanism that would be associated with a public network that wouldn't necessarily, have to change your backend. And so you can be using Hyperledger Fabric on the IBM blockchain platform with Hedera Consensus Service to get more toward that happy medium. And with that, I want Mance to take it away because he does a better job than I can.
No, that was good. So let me explain what the Hedera Consensus Service is, because that's probably helpful in this context. Most public chains do two things. They take transactions and they put them into a consensus order. That's the first thing. And then once they have those transactions in a consensus order, they will feed those transactions into smart contracts, into a smart contract layer. And the smart contract layer is problematic in that those smart contracts are all running on these public nodes. So everyone that has a smart contract is competing for the same CPU resources, which drives the price up to run your smart contracts, and their privacy issues. If you have a smart contract that wants to take A and add it to B, it needs to know what the value of A and B are to do that calculation. And so if you care about the privacy of your data, then you got to be careful about what you're feeding into this smart contract. What Hedera did was split those two layers apart. And we have Hashgraph as a service. Think of it that way. Hashgraph as a service. That's the Hedera Consensus Service. All it does is it takes those transactions, they're flowing into Hedera, puts them into consensus order. Then we can take Hyperledger, for example, or IBP, and have the smart contract layer that's in a private network. It's not a smart contract, you wouldn't call it that, but that's really what we're talking about. You could create a private network of nodes that are all operating the same business logic, smart contract, and the consensus mechanism is in a private network, in a public network, which is Hedera. So you're leveraging the public trust model of a public network, while at the same time getting the benefits of low cost, scalability, and privacy in a private network using Hyperledger, for example. You're unifying the two markets and getting the best of both. And that's what we have. We have a plugin for Hyperledger that makes it trivial to take a Hyperledger project, run it in a private network, but use the Hedera Consensus Service rather than Raft or Kafka, which is what it ships with normally. Rather than using those, you can use HCS, and you get the best of both worlds. And that does lead to this whole, collaboration idea, if you will, across platforms, that, as Paige was suggesting. We can, and there are a lot of other ways you can use it that way, but the idea of layer zero, differentiating the stack of technologies into layer zero being consensus and using the best consensus layer for the next layer up, whatever that is, across different platforms, is the way I think that the market is going to evolve. It's the way all tech markets evolve. They start with one big monolithic piece of code, which was Bitcoin originally, and over time the market matures and the layers differentiate, and you end up with competition at each layer. And that's what we see happening here.
Gotcha. All right, so that's fascinating. I think I see parallels between the approaches everyone is taking here. Everyone's going about it in very different ways, but it does seem like this idea of layers being separated and making it so that each layer is a bit simpler, a bit more focused, and it just is more interoperable with the others. That seems like the approach that ETH 2.0 and sidechains are taking as well, but Hedera is going at a different rate as well with Hyperledger Fabric. So if there's agreement here, I think everyone feels like separating layers and making it easier to keep track, I think is something everyone would benefit from. So I'm interested to see how everyone's approaches work out over the next few years, because it sounds like everyone's got big plans. So with that being said, I have a few discussion questions, and then we'll open it up to the panel. We've got some extra time, so we have another 20 minutes extended out to 2:40. So what I'll do, I'll start with and this is an open discussion, so whichever you wish to go first, first come, first served. What do you think is the most misunderstood thing about blockchain or DLT technology, but just in general, like for kind of the layman out there? What is something that if you could correct an assumption out there that you would like to address, either ways it shouldn't be used or ways that people think about it?
I have one. I think a lot is made out of the word consensus, and it really means something technical, like a bunch of people agree to an order of a set of events, and it doesn't necessarily. It can facilitate something like, a board meeting happening and people voting, and then us eventually reaching agreement on some business issue, or things of that nature. But people tend to think it is the latter, in a sense, but it really is a sort of low level. It's a really important innovation, but they tend to think of it more in the context of what they are doing with the technology than what it actually does. And so I think we should almost talk a little bit less about consensus algorithms when we're speaking to an end user audience, or even a company that's trying to leverage blockchain technology to bring a solution to market. It's just the thing that makes all the data match perfectly, and we didn't have that before, but I think too much has been made of, people are like, so do you have mining, or do you have, and it's like, that layer, it's not completely solved, but it's solved enough that as a consumer of the technology, you should be thinking about other properties.
Gotcha. So kind of basically like it's not going to help you reach decisions, but when you reach your decision, that it's going to be processed correctly. Is that kind of what you're describing?
I think in the end, it's for a certain, cross-party data integrity is what it's allowing, and a certain, security that you didn't have before, and assurance. But yes, it's not the way we think of governance in like a corporate setting at all. And that analogy is made a lot. And so I think it confuses people as they're adopting the technology.
Gotcha.
I have a couple.
Yeah, go ahead, Paige.
Hudson, you can.
No, you said it first. You did it first.
I'll rapid fire them. The first, and this is coming from having worked on the sales side before I moved into the product management side. A lot of people refer to it as the blockchain, and there's not one blockchain, like that doesn't exist. Or they think that they can have a blockchain and benefit from it just internally, like one company would have their own blockchain, which they could, but that doesn't really, that doesn't bring the value of blockchain. It's all around multi-party transactions and distributed trust. So that doesn't make sense. And then the other piece is around that every blockchain has a cryptocurrency aspect, and that there's Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency. All of those things just kind of get lumped under the term blockchain. And so we've worked on debunking those over the years, but that's just a couple that come to mind.
Here, here.
My main one is that there's this idea that the only way on a fully public, permissionless blockchain to get private data is to hash the data and then hope that it never gets unhashed by the wrong party or something like that. When really there's a lot of really cutting edge stuff, especially from other, blockchain companies like the Electric Coin Company with zero knowledge proofs, where you can basically submit data or to a blockchain. So it's not as general purpose as it needs to be yet, but it's definitely getting there more quickly than we thought, where you can submit something to a blockchain and you can prove that you submitted it to the blockchain without revealing what the data is, except for the person receiving the data. And that's something where I don't think enough is being talked about, that is a solution that's becoming available today, especially for things like, numeric ledger like transfers. So if you're wanting to trade a crypto coin, you can do that with a zero knowledge proof today. And later on, you'll be able to do other business logic using zero knowledge proofs, and you won't even have to talk about hashing anymore. It won't even be an option. You'd rather be using ZK proofs because they're cheaper and more reliable and provably secure.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been following Zcash for a little bit and seeing how Ethereum is trying to apply that, as well as other companies, because I've seen other protocols start to take after. It's going to be really interesting. I know JP Morgan was working with him a little bit as well. Any fun ones from you, Mance?
I will second all of those. There's nothing that immediately comes. I remember way back to the earliest days, what we kept saying back. I don't think people make this mistake anymore, but just because it's in the blockchain doesn't mean that it's true, right? Garbage in, garbage out. There's nothing magic about information that's stored in the blockchain that, confirms its veracity. I think the market has moved on and is smart enough to know that's not the case today. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. No, those are all good. I feel for all of those. I've had some client conversations that reflect those assumptions sometimes. So I think we're all ready to move past that. So here's another interesting one then to kind of go off of that. What are some of the biggest challenges that you all see for blockchain and DLT for the next several years? What are the real challenges to mass adoption? And even assuming that scalability and other things are solved, like what is it really going to take for an individual to use this on a daily basis, like they use everything else that we consider essential today, like email or banking applications or anything else like that? What are some of those challenges that people really that hasn't been solved yet, but is going to take time?
I can start again. So I think you can look to other technologies, and I'll speak with respect to sort of the B2B context, less consumer applications, though in the end, I think people will not know so much that they're using a blockchain, just like they don't know they're using a web server on top of an Oracle database, if anyone is still using Oracle databases. No, I can't. If anyone from Oracle is here. I think the big challenge, so I think of blockchain as having a pretty strong technology to other B2B integration technologies like EDI and that sort of thing, which took quite a long time to get adopted. They sort of started to be popular where they're really needed in logistics and that sort of thing. Just some automated means of communicating, hey, shipment's coming. Made immediate impact, and this even happened almost before the open internet, right? But to get to really wide scale, there was a very heavy standardization effort that had to happen. So you've got to have certain message types that you know what they mean, like just EDI X12 type standards, which are sometimes you have file-based standards, sometimes you have XML, et cetera. But getting everyone to speak the same language was an enormous challenge to getting EDI implemented, and then having it be having that language be extended over time was very challenging. A lot of committee work and all that sort of thing. We are a little bit better off with blockchain in that it's more of a self-extensible technology, but still you've got to kind of get people to agree to some extent to use the same technology and network it all together. And at that point, you're in a position where you can extend it with different use cases as needed. But that effort is really quite enormous. And the reason it's hard is, I would say, more business reasons than technical. I think the technical solutions at this point are good enough for the vast majority of use cases. The tough part is figuring out what is the model of the network, who is allowed to run the nodes, what's the business model, is this a cost recovery play, do we need to set up an industry utility that the big enterprises own to manage this thing? Can they do it themselves? What's the purpose? What's the initial purpose of the network? How are you allowed to extend it? How do you benefit from the network effects? That sort of thing. And I would say those questions are technical, but they're more commercial than technical. And there's a bunch of successful approaches, but I wouldn't say that one has really clearly won. And having been involved in the formation of many consortia and just commercial initiatives that have now started to look like consortia, there's not a crystal clear answer in my mind. And so I think that's the biggest thing that needs to happen for large-scale B2B adoption, just kind of figuring out which models really work there and how to scale them up fairly easily for wide-scale industry adoption. I don't think there are technical questions that remain, but I don't think that's the core problem.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I'd just say it's kind of threefold. First being governance models and going back and forth on what makes the most sense depending on who's in the network and what they're trying to achieve. The others being incentive models, what's in it for me and why should I participate? And then the third being the biggest and probably most obvious, which is around industry collaboration and disruption. If there's certain first movers in an industry and they start to do something, it's not going to be effective if they can't get significant majority on board. And so we have all these industry consortia, but until they can reach agreement on what the end state looks like and what they're trying to achieve and why they should dedicate time and resources to making this shift, that seems to be the biggest challenge that I notice in talking to customers.
Interesting. Well, I think any comments from you, Hudson and Mance, quickly? Otherwise, I think we can move on to questions.
I would say regulatory is still out there. It's been the problem for 3 years now. It's what stopped 2017's bull run, right? And appropriately so. And we're making progress. I think progress is being made, but we're not in the clear yet. And when we are, and it becomes evident that we are, that unleashes a wave of investment and movement forward for the industry as a whole.
All right. Okay. So with that being said, we've got about another 10 minutes left. So I'll start going through some questions and we'll kind of keep it a bit more rapid fire to see if we can get through as many as we can. So we'll try to maybe 30-second answers if possible. So with that being said, let's do one that I found interesting. I almost asked this question myself. How do you all see interoperability with the wider blockchain ecosystem for each of your platforms? I think we've gotten into that, but I guess the question would then be like, how much interoperability do you see in the space down the road?
A bunch. At least I'm mostly in the public permission or public open, I guess, area of blockchains, but I'm seeing Cosmos and Polkadot rise up as kind of the two bigger names out there that are going to be helping with like cross blockchain interoperability when it comes to stuff like that. And there's even some stuff just like in Stealth right now that are doing EVM based style interoperability machines that are going to be really interesting. So I think there's going to be a lot in the future.
All right. And here's another one that is interesting because this technically affects all of your platforms. Do you all think that Solidity, what are your thoughts on Solidity and is it here to stay? Because I think all of your platforms in some form or another do support Solidity. Even Hyperledger Fabric I know has an extension for it. So what are your comments on that? Any thoughts?
I guess I'll venture an answer. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think Solidity is a good and workable language. We have hit limitations with it, but I would say there are more limitations of the underlying EVM, just things like stack depth limits and that sort of thing that sometimes, if you're trying to get a lot of data into the blockchain, it's challenging. You got to break it up into chunks, etc. And so you see a little bit of that in Solidity. It's not a perfect language, but it's familiar. People like it, etc. I think in the longer run, you're going to see languages that look a little less like C or JavaScript or Java, and probably a little more like SQL and purpose-built data manipulation languages with a little bit of workflow on top. So the workflow stuff may still look like C or JavaScript. But the analogy I would make is sort of relational database, data manipulation language, and then you're going to have some stored procedure language that coordinates more complex updates and that sort of thing, and maybe maintains more business level constraints on what you can do. But I think it'll go more declarative over time and less imperative. That seems to be the trend everywhere for specific stuff.
Anyone else?
Well, so I don't know about Solidity in particular. What I can say is that when we implemented Solidity on top of Hedera, we took open source software and used it, and it was architected in such a way that we couldn't scale with it, right? I mean, Solidity, at least the implementation that we were using, made assumptions about how many transactions per second you would expect to flow through the network. And so the fact that we could do orders of magnitude more turned Solidity into the bottleneck. And so there is that. But I don't like the model at all. Let me just, what I mean by that, and I'm not talking about Solidity, I'm talking about the idea that you should try to build applications on a public network. I think there will always be utilities that are executed in smart contracts in the traditional sense of the term. But obviously I'm biased here, but I like the idea of taking all that business logic, putting it into multiple nodes in a private network that allows you to use anything you want to develop the application, right? Any programming language at any layer in the stack to develop the application, and just use the public network for consensus, what it was originally intended for. And that model makes a lot of sense to me.
Gotcha. So basically, if Solidity continues, it wouldn't, at least in your view, for what Hedera hasn't planned, it wouldn't be to, whatever the future would look like, it should be more focused on consensus. With, if there is a Solidity, it might be on a different layer.
Whether it's Solidity or any smart contract language, the smart contracts themselves, I would think, would be tiny and sort of used as utilities. But the real business logic would be stored elsewhere and executed elsewhere. Yeah.
That makes sense. Solidity wouldn't work for something like Hedera because Hedera isn't a blockchain. And when building Solidity, a lot had to be taken into consideration of the fact that you're using a very chaotic, open, accessible blockchain system, a network of nodes that need to have limitations and need to be near Turing complete, but have some stuff that isn't entirely Turing complete, because that would you're having to deal with things like gas mechanisms in the case of Ethereum, where you only can run a certain amount of programs so that they don't go into infinite loop and use up all the resources in the system. When you're dealing with more maybe like permission systems or custom things that are blockchain adjacent, you don't necessarily need that, because you can set up those boundaries in other areas that the permissioned users that are known in the system can actually look at and say, oh, I'll follow those rules. So really what you're doing is you're giving up a bit of the censorship resistance around it, but at the same time, that's a trade-off for having more usability and a language that might be more flexible for your use case.
Gotcha. All right. So I think we're coming close to time. So let me wrap up with a final open question based on someone else, but they were asking, they'd love to see some cool use cases. Like, what are some cool use cases that y'all have seen either on your platforms or just in general? They were asking about social impact or supply chain, especially during, the coronavirus and things that really impact that. But just in general, what has really excited you over the last year?
take the social impact one, which is, for those who know me, maybe slightly surprising. We're doing a lot of work in the general kind of carbon tracking area. One project we have is based in New York, largely because New York has a regulation that stipulates that all buildings have to be carbon neutral by, I believe, 2025. And so really what we're doing, we're working with a company that makes cogeneration units. So they take in natural gas, they produce energy, and you get hot water for free. That's sort of their business model. And so using the data from their meters and others as we bring them on the network, you can prove a energy and CO2 emissions reduction. And this allows you to actually issue credits against that. And the credits are interchangeable. So if you're a building and you can't get in compliance with this law fast enough, you can then down the road just purchase the credits to offset your old, non-compliant, too expensive to update building. And actually, this is kind of we've seen a real uptick in interest in this kind of general area. We have a focus in the energy sector, so a lot of the big oil and gas firms have similar mandates actually to greatly reduce the carbon intensity of their operations, and so we're doing a lot of work there. This is kind of our major social impact effort at this point.
Very cool.
Yeah, I already touched on some earlier, so I'll keep my answer short. But I think anything in healthcare is really interesting to me, not just because of COVID, but because of how little transparency and cross communication there is between different healthcare providers and hospital systems. And when you think about how important that information is, having it stored on a blockchain is definitely something that would be interesting. I always call it kind of a patient passport use case, but being able to own your own data, grant permission to it when permission needs to be granted, and also just be notified when that information is being accessed and leveraged by larger corporations. That goes outside of healthcare. But yeah, data ownership and just being able to do things like contact tracing, all sorts of things with just giving people control of their own data and permissioning it to other parties.
Yeah, decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, are really exciting. If anyone wants to look up Moloch DAO, MOLOCH, that's a thing that the Ethereum Foundation has given money to and that I'm a part of. It's a grant-giving DAO, so you basically take a traditional structure for an organization or a company, and it's very transparent. There's voting members. It's like having your own company on a blockchain, but making it very transparent and customizable to have voting shares equal to your number of shares in the company, and we've given out I think hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants using Moloch DAO in a very organized and decentralized and transparent way.
Yeah, and for those of you who like it, look it up. I love it, but don't be turned off by the references to pagan gods. That's just something.
Yeah, we just get a little weird sometimes, but yeah.
Well, so to be very brief, Deepak Chopra just recently announced that he was creating the Never Alone Foundation. It's this idea, it really, in technical terms, it's a content curation and management solution, crowdsourcing healthcare-related content, mental health-related content on Hedera, and also using a token that then compensates those that created the content for the work that they've done based on usage. And so I love the model in general, right? I love the model of having a different type of educational solution that uses this technology to bring the content, and the content that's the best content gets, quote, voted up because they get compensated the most based on usage. Which is an interesting it's an interesting model for the future, I think.
Awesome. All right, so we are, I think, unfortunately out of time. We've got another event coming up in a couple of minutes, but this was an awesome conversation. I loved hearing all of your perspectives, and I think I honestly, even just myself, I feel like I followed the space a lot, but I feel like I got a lot better perspective about where everyone stands and what things are going to look like in another year or two. So I'm excited to see what it's like by next September. I think it's going to be really wild to see where y'all platforms are and where the space is in general. So thank you all for your time. And for those of you who are on and listening, please stay tuned for the blockchain track, hearing about the Dallas blockchain pioneers and the community from Lacey Shrum, Stephen Ellis, and Lee Bratcher. That's going to be a really good talk as well. So please stay tuned. So thank you all.
Thank everybody.
Thank you.